Hey everyone, friendly Dr. H here, your Wart in the Wargame guy over at the Air Command and Staff College. A couple of people asked for videos to sort of help with the paralysis analysis that can come from having all of the choices that you have in the ground rule system. And so, what I'm hoping to do here is, with this video, sort of analyze what's happening with a lot of the pieces, specifically the support pieces like SAW forces, helo units, artillery units, headquarters units. Look at the charts a little bit to talk about what these things are, what these pieces are generally good for. Do some analysis about their strengths and their weaknesses, and come to some conclusions to sort of help you decide how best to use these parts and pieces in the game. Um, Given that there's no play in this one, I'm going to show you kind of some ideas in some other videos about how to use them effectively. But for right now, we're just going to have a quick talk through. So I've got some PowerPoint slides with words that we'll click through a little bit. Those are mostly notes. If you want to stop, if I sort of gloss over something and you want to stop and read it, go ahead there. We're going to look at some charts. We're going to look at a little bit of pieces, but not too much. So let's start with Special Operations Forces, soft forces, and it's like cat card. Um, so if we remind ourselves, right, we come over here to the charts. Just as a reminder, right, we have raids, we have reconnaissance, and we have targeting as sort of the big things you can do with them. Raids cause strike damage, but those have to be against detected units. If you need to detect a unit that hasn't been detected, we haven't played with the detection rules quite yet, but we'll add those in sooner or later. So we're going to play, so we have um, recon to think about. So do we want to do reconnaissance? That will help us detect things. And then there's also targeting. So one thing I would point out here is that if we look at the chart itself, we'll notice that as the terrain gets tougher, we start pushing to the right. And generally, the further to the right we go on this matrix, right, the further right the column, the better we are. So, right, headquarters and supply depots are tough to damage compared to mobile supply units, compared to airfields, right? So, generally speaking, if we sort of push ourselves um, further to the right, that's good. And we can also see that flat and open terrains without woods on them produce are furthest to the left, and then mountain, urban, and jungle hexes are furthest to the right. So that means that obviously the closer the terrain, the better the raid's going to be, because that gives those forces more room to infiltrate and to do their job. So keep that in mind. This is the opposite if we scroll down and take a look at the strike chart. You'll notice, again, same thing. You want to be further to the right when you find your column, and you'll notice that that strike numbers, that strikes by anything else, helicopters, artillery, aircraft, missiles, are all better in in more open terrain. Right? We wouldn't be hitting people in the flats. We wouldn't be hitting people in woods to a lesser extent. We don't want to be hitting people in mountains or in cities if we can help it. So, right, if you have a target and that target is in terrain that is not good for most things to strike, think about a raid with special operations forces. Targeting is really good for targets that must be struck repeatedly. If you have a really hardened target, or you have an extreme, or you have a very high value target that you want to do something about, consider using a special operations force unit to target it, particularly the really higher end ones like the Russians, the US, the UK, I should say the Commonwealth, the Chinese, to do that, because that gives you the best bang for your buck in targeting. That gives you a better modifier. Um, so if you've got something that it's going to be a hardened target, or it's something that you really want to get wrecked, and you're going to commit assets to it to strike it repeatedly, targeting is going to help with that. If it's marginal and you're not really critical, it gets destroyed, probably not worth risking the soft marker. And then remember, you can also do interdiction. Interdiction is good against long supply lines, and that's fundamentally true all around. If you look and you see an enemy force has a long supply line, consider interdiction somewhere on that supply line, right? So if you've got, we'll probably look at this more in some example videos, but if you've got a unit that has to move multiple movement point, has to move several movement points down a long highway. And if you want to interdict that highway, especially if you can interdict that highway where it joins up with another road that they might want to alternate on, use as an alternate route, that's a good start. And that's something that you should consider there. So special operations forces are very flexible, and that can lead to a lot of paralysis by analysis, or I should say analysis paralysis. You've got a lot of choices. So I would simply sit down, and we're going to talk about this more later. This is important to consider your planning time. Do I have targets that I need to strike, that I'm going to have to probably strike repeatedly to ensure their destruction? Targeting. Do I have targets that I want to strike, but they're in terrain that isn't conducive to anything else? Raid. Do I have a target that I need to find before I can hit it? Detection. Those are your best uses for those. Those are sort of your use cases for special operations forces and when to use them. So let's talk about helicopters. Helicopter 2 units are much better strikes than Helicopter 1 units. Again, if we come down and we take a look at the strike chart, you can see that Helo 2 is 2 columns to the right. In almost every circumstance, other than trying to hit hardened targets, are 2 columns to the right of Helo 1s. So Helo 2 units are far better at striking than Helo 1 units. If you have a Helo 1 unit, personal recommendation for me is consider using that in close support. Helo 2 units are also good in close support because, again, a 2 DRM modifier is very good. But also consider its flexibility and its range. Now, one thing you want to be very careful about is using them in dense air defense areas, because helicopters, if they get intercepted, are going to be in very serious trouble. So when you have Helo 2 units, consider how best to use them, and that's again going to consider on some prioritization. Right? Use them for strikes. Use them for strikes against lesser priority targets. Again, your bigger priority targets, you're probably going to send your serious strike aircraft or cruise missiles after. Lower priority targets, you may want to use a Helo 2. Consider their range, right? Their distance, their flexibility. Or use them for combat support, which is also a good choice. They're very good for that. So if you're looking at it like, I don't know what I want to strike with this thing, use it for combat support. That's the easiest solution to your problem. But if you are looking at but if you've sat down and thought about your targets and what you want to hit and why, and you are kind of struggling, which you want to hit and why, you know which one to hit with Helo 2 units, go for it. If not, if you want to hold them back for combat support, that's not a bad choice. That's a good choice. And again, be careful in air defenses. They do not react. Helicopters do not react well to SAM umbrellas. You want to fly them against targets that are protected by local defense that are outside of SAM umbrellas, if at all possible, because they are going to be pretty vulnerable to interception, early detection, interception, being shot at. So keep that all in mind. And again, remember that any result for Helo 2, for any result that isn't a +1 on the air defense chart, so if we come and look at the air defense chart really quickly, right, if we're looking at SAM-8, whoops, that's detection. If we're looking at SAM-8, right, if there's any roll 6 or less, that helicopter's not going to be effective for a helicopter 2. For a helicopter 1, it's 8 or less. And you do get some positive modifiers in that direction, some modifiers that will help the helicopter, but again, in those heavy SAM umbrellas, it's going to be very tricky to make them use. So you want to kind of look for places where that are much less covered by SAM batteries in order to use those. So that's considerations for using helicopters. Okay, artillery units. So one, not everybody has artillery units, nor in equal amounts when they do have them, right? The Russians and the Chinese have them. The North Koreans have them. I think that's it. I think those are the only countries that get them. And they don't get them in equal amounts. The North Koreans have a few. The Russians have a few more. The Chinese have a few more than the Russians. So keep that in mind. right? So not everybody gets these, and if you do have them, you really want to think about how to use them. Now, if we come over here and we take now, artillery units don't have the same range as strike units, right? So if we come over here and we look, we've got an artillery unit here, right? It's got the superscript of 5. It's got a range of 5. We look at this headquarters unit, superscript of 5, range of 5. The U.S. headquarters over here, same thing, superscript of 5, range of 5. So they have about the same range as headquarters units. And also, you'll notice a lot less than helicopter units. Helicopter units have generally ranges of 12. So helicopter units, again, generally double the range or more than these units. So they're going to be used in much closer situations than helicopters. They're going to have to stay. They're going to be supportive of actions where they're close to. And if we come over here and we look at the chart really quickly, we can see that other headquarters and artillery, right? So anything that's not a U.S. headquarters, and isn't a Supreme headquarters, which we haven't played yet, so don't worry about it, are the same as artillery brigades. So they have the same striking value as most headquarters units. So if you have a lot of things to strike, and it's really important that you've got the range, right, which is probably going to be, 5 hexes, you have to think there's probably going to be some intervening hexes, so a couple of hexes behind where your line is, that's about the range you're looking at. If there's something really important to strike there, you can use it there. The big thing I would say is that the biggest thing they do is they cause a column shift. And they cause a column shift no matter the circumstances. So headquarters add combat value. These just add an automatic combat shift. So they're very good for large battles, and that's where I would focus on using my artillery to support large battles, 3+ units on a side, where they can really weigh in, give you a shift in your favor, and that's where I think they're going to do the most damage in those circumstances. If you don't think you're going to have those kinds of battles, or you're coming to the second strike phase and you're looking around going, I've got 2 capabilities left, then maybe use them as strikes. But I would try to concentrate, I would try to use them for those big, massive battles where they're going to have them, that's where they'll have the most impact. Okay, we come down to headquarters units. Headquarters in combat support are worth about a brigade. So if we come here, right, again, headquarters, superscript 5, headquarters, superscript 5. And if we look at these brigades, right, and we have obviously a huge exception, U.S. Armored Combat Brigade has a combat value of 7. That's pretty good, but still not double what a headquarters is. These Russian brigades here, right, you're looking at 4s and 5s, so about the same as headquarters. The same with this Dutch brigade here, 4. This U.S. infantry brigades, 3 in the attack, 4 in the defense. So they're about the same as another brigade, which means that if you sort of want to optimize their use, they're very good at smaller battles, right? So if you're going to use them in combat support, use them in smaller battles, 1 or 2 units per side. U.S. headquarters are just better at strikes. So if you want to use them if you are thinking, I want to use my headquarters elements for strikes. Sorry, my cat has decided to come over and sit on me. Then if you're in the United States and you have the option between using United States headquarters for strikes or other allied countries' headquarters for strikes, then use the U.S. headquarters for strikes. But again, I recommend looking at smaller combats where you have 1 or 2 units per side. Those are a good place where they can really swing. They add in another combat unit's worth of value and can easily push the columns and the odds generally in your favor. So keep that in mind. Also, another thing that's really important to keep in mind is that headquarters play a major role in all kinds of things. Supply, crossing rivers, air defense fire. These are very valuable units. So if you're looking for things to target to really affect particularly an area in combat, if you're looking for things that you want to hit that have a pretty big impact on a lot of rules, you should think about headquarters. Your headquarters attacking the headquarters can affect the supply situation, can affect their ability to cross rivers, so you're affecting their mobility, and you're affecting their air defense, and also affecting their ability to support. So consider consider that, right? Like if you're thinking about what to target, headquarters are pretty valuable targets, especially if you're talking about hitting them with things that have shorter range. Like that's the only thing we can hit. Good thing to hit. So right, so if we go through right, helicopter units, particularly helicopter 2 units, think about what you want to hit with their range, given their range and their flexibility. But using them in combat support isn't a bad idea. Artillery units are the same as headquarters units, but provide a bigger boost in larger combats. So think about if it looks like you're going to be generating a lot of larger combats, use artillery units for combat support there. Headquarters units are good for a lot of things. So if you have smaller battles, consider support. Otherwise, continue strikes. But what do I want to target with these things? The biggest issue with artillery and headquarters strikes is range. 4 to 5 hexes from the unit. And so most of what's going to be in range are ground units, headquarters, and artillery. If you strike against a ground unit, what you're largely going to impact is efficiency rating and movement. You'll also affect its combat values, but those are two really valuable things to hit. Remember, if you have the better your efficiency rating, that starts to be column shifts in your favor, and we know column shifts are good. So if you have an isolated unit that's in a highly defensible position, consider striking it to soften it up to lower its efficiency rating more than its combat values, and then dogpile it, right? So if you've got that infantry unit dug into a city, getting it, if it's an American, again, if we come over here to sort of this American airborne brigade, where the classic American airborne brigade stuck in a city or an urban hex, if we can, in the defense, it's in an urban hex, it's going to be 8 defense and an ER of 7. If we hit it twice, it now becomes a defense of 4, right? That 4 goes down to 2, 2 doubled is 4, and an ER of 5, and that's a much softer target. So if you've got really hard targets in positions that you need to take, for sure, that are very high on your list of things you need to get done, that's a good time to directly strike the unit. Or if you want to or if you want to hit enemy reserves a bit, to slow down their ability to move in. Those are good things. The big thing to think about strikes against headquarters and artillery units is that you cause capability loss. Let's take a second, see if I was smart and put this in here. Here we go, the strike effect tables, right? So ground unit, right, MA and ER, those are great. Also, can't move an exploitation or elite reaction. So again, right, we're affecting enemy mobility with strikes on units. The big thing to take a look at is that on headquarters and artillery, right, every successful strike is costs them 1 capability and also limits their ability to move, particularly in movement phases, right? So if I'm just looking at this from sort of a cost-benefit analysis as a general rule, I would prefer to strike headquarters and artillery units. Unless there's a ground unit that's dug into a particularly tough place. Fortifications, cities, jungle highland hexes, urban hexes that I want to soften up, by reducing their ER and their combat values, or in order to help build column shifts and reduce any multipliers they may have, or if I'm about to cross a river or conduct an amphibious assault on a guarded hex. Iffy, but fun, but an option. Or alternatively, if I'm trying to stop an enemy from using their units in reinforcement, right? I can reduce their movement, their ability to move in the exploitation or reaction phases, right? So if I want to try to break up enemy movement, that's what striking units are good at. If I want to reduce the ability of my enemy to do things using their headquarters and artillery units, remember, striking them takes away capabilities. You only get 2 capabilities per turn. So if I hit you with a strike and I get a result and I take away 1, that's half that unit's ability during any turn. So I sort of would point you in that direction. So how do I use my planning time in light of this? So when you're planning, think about how you want to use strikes to support your overall plan. What is my overall plan? If my overall plan is going to involve a lot of maneuver, I want to go after units, particularly reserve units or units that can react and stop my direction. So like if I'm going around a flank, if I'm trying to cut an enemy, if I'm trying to cut the enemy off, if I want to separate the enemy from the enemy front line from their reserves, strikes against supply, interdiction strikes, and units will do very well there, right? I'm going to reduce the ability of units to move if I strike them. I'm going to reduce my enemy's options if I hit supply lines or supply depots. Correction, if I hit supply depots or headquarters units. Um, and if I um, if I interdict supply lines, I'm restricting their ability to move without going out of supply, and out of supply is bad. You don't want that to happen to you, so that's useful. Strikes against enemy units, headquarters, or artillery units are good at sapping combat power. So if you want to fight, like I am going to attack this area with a lot of fighting, right? I'm going to drop heavy units in this direction. This is my main effort for ground attack. Then I want to hit headquarters. I want to hit artillery units, and then I want to hit. I may want to hit specific units with strikes. On the other hand, I may also. It may be better, and if I know I'm going to be fighting combats with a couple of units, then to use that for start using units for combat support, right? So if I'm going to do a lot of fighting, I may decide to hit a couple of headquarters units to try to reduce the enemy's ability to support their own guys, and then use the rest of what I've got for combat support, right? So when you're planning, you want to sort of conceptualize, how do I want to use my units? Do I want to maneuver into an open space? So I want to slow down mobility, so go after units in reserve in particular, go after supply, go interdict supply. If I'm going to really hit an area hard, probably hold back some stuff for combat support, hit their headquarters or artillery units to reduce their ability to do combat support, and then roll in with a lot of guys. And that kind of comes to some recommendations or just some observations. Soft forces are versatile. If you have high value targets in bad terrain, raid them. If you need to detect, there's a high value target out there that you haven't detected by the detection rules, and you need to hit it, send the soft out to go find it. If your enemy supply lines are really stretched, interdiction. Or if you've got a really hard target and you absolutely have, or a target you absolutely have to destroy this turn, consider using targeting soft forces. HQ units are good for strikes or to support small fights. Remember, 1 or 2 units. Headquarters units are good for that. So if you're planning on doing a lot of ground combat in the smaller fights, hold your HQs for combat support. Artillery is good for large fights. That's really what I would be looking at. I'd be looking at, when am I going to have 3 or 4 or 5 units in one combat? Then I want to use my artillery units for that if I have them. Helo units are very flexible. Helo 1s, I recommend pretty much using those for combat support. They're not very good at strikes. Helo 2 units are good in any direction. If you've definitely got targets that you want to hit that you think will help you in your maneuver or your combat, then go ahead, hit them, and hit them good. Otherwise, hold them back for combat support. You're fine there, and be very wary of air defenses when you're using helicopters. If you really want to fight, hit headquarters and artillery with strikes, take away their combat capabilities, then use what you have left for combat support. If you want to maneuver, hit supply and reserve units to keep the enemy from reacting to you, right? So remember, elite movement and exploitation combat, elite movement and exploitation movement, you need to be outside of a zone of control, so having guys in reserve helps there. So if I hit them, but if I start hitting them, if I start striking those units, I reduce the ability of the enemy to commit reserves or to react to my maneuver. So if I'm going to try to attempt some sort of flanking maneuver, some sort of envelopment, some sort of turning maneuver, and I need the space to do that, then strikes against units will help there. And if you want to do combat, take a look at trying to reduce the enemy's capabilities to help or to conduct those sorts of missions. So this is the start of this discussion. Very quickly, just talking about these different units and how I understand them. Feel free to talk more about that in the comments below. What you think, or if I've missed something out, or alternatively, if you are good with some basic statistics and analysis of a combat results table, hit me up. I could use some help figuring that out because I'm a historian, not a statistician. Anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I will have more videos showing examples of what I'm talking about later.